Okay, let's see how we can use our new token to authenticate to our API endpoint. So let's go back to, or let's clean things up at the top. Let's pick on a controller and our users controller to demonstrate this. Now our account controller, obviously we're not going to ask users to be authenticated before we let them log in. That would be silly, as they cannot be authenticated if they're trying to log in, or register of course to our application. So we're not going to have these endpoints as authenticated endpoints. But our user controller, we can test this functionality inside here. Now we add this as an attribute, and if we wanted an endpoint to be allowed for anonymous users, then we could say allow anonymous. And with our current configuration, that is the setting that is enabled. If I do not add this, then anonymous users can access this endpoint currently. But if we had authorize at the top level of our API controller, but we wanted this particular endpoint to be authenticated, then we could override the authorize with allow anonymous. But it doesn't work the other way round. If you allow anonymous at the top level, then you cannot override it with the authorize. So just bear that in mind, because that may cause you a surprise if you allowed anonymous at the top level and then further down you did want an authorized endpoint. That wouldn't work as you would expect it to work. We're not going to use the top level authorize attribute here. I'm just going to have allow anonymous just to be explicit about what this is going to return for anonymous users. And for the get user, I'm just going to make this authorized. This is just a test to make sure that we can authenticate correctly to our endpoints and we get the appropriate response when it doesn't work. Now, in our program.cs class, we took away any middleware related to authorization, or at least I did earlier on. So currently there is nothing. And in order to add the middleware that we need for this and the service, we need a service for authentication and we need middleware for this to work. We do need to install another NuGet package. And is NuGet Gallery going to be working for me yet? No. I'm going to have to use the VS Code system. So I'm going to say NuGet add NuGet package, and then I'm going to say Microsoft.ASP.NET Core.authentication and press return. I don't like this one so much because we do need to be a bit more accurate with the search facility inside here than we do with NuGet Gallery, but I can cope for the time being with this. But I've got a feeling I'm going to have to restart things to get NuGet Gallery to work again. But I need this one, Microsoft ASP.NET Core Authentication JWT Bearer. So I'm going to select that one. And as per normal, when it comes to packages like these, then just get the latest one available. And in this case, 8.0.4. And that should now be available for our use. So the middleware then, let's add this. Well, the service first of all. So I'm going to say builder.services, and then we can say add authentication. And the type of authentication we're going to add, we're going to use JWT Bearer defaults, and we get this from the package we've just installed. And then we specify authentication scheme. Below this, we're going to chain on, add JWT Bearer, and then we pass this some options. So we'll add the arrow and then add the configuration that we need to add here. Now we need to get hold of our token key again because we're using symmetric security. We need the same token to decrypt as we do to encrypt. So I'm going to get hold of the token key. So I'm going to say var token key equals and then builder.configuration in square brackets token key. And then if we do not have it, I'm just going to throw a new exception and say token key not found. And then I'm going to say the options.token validation parameters equals new token validation parameters. And inside here we specify our token validation options. So we're going to say validate issuer signing key, and we're going to set this one to true. If we don't have this one, then this will just accept any token, whether it's been signed or not. So that one is necessary. And then we need to tell it what the issuer signing key actually is it's validating against. So we'll specify issuer signing key equals new symmetric security key, and we use the same encoding that we did before. So I'm going to say encoding and UTF-8 and get bytes and pass in the token key. And then we're just going to add a couple of more flags inside here, and we're going to say validate issuer and set that to false, and we're going to say validate audience and again set that to false, as these are typically enabled by default, and I just want to turn off these because we're not passing the issuer down to our token, nor are we passing the audience down to our token, so it's not something that we can validate against right now. So that will suffice for the configuration of authentication. And then we need to add the middleware. Now, once again, when it comes to middleware, the ordering is important. If you would like to experiment, please feel free to do so. But then, of course, when it doesn't work, please come back and put the authentication middleware in the same place that I'm about to put it in, as it may work in a different location, but what I'm about to show you will definitely work. And we're going to say app use authentication first of all. We have to authenticate someone before we can authorize them. And then below this, we're going to say app use authorization. And this is the ordering that you need to have. And like I say, the ordering is important here. If you do put this below the map controllers, it probably won't work. So then you'd have to come back and correct the ordering. It's quite often, I commonly see in the questions as well, that the authentication is after the authorization. That's another way you can guarantee this is not going to work. The use authentication has to come first. And then, in order to test this functionality, we need to make sure our API server is started or restarted correctly. And once again, hot reloading doesn't like this change in our code. So once again, I'm going to say yes to restart the app. And if you're beginning to wonder what the whole point of hot reload is, then welcome to my world. I've been wondering this for quite some time, and I find myself restarting the app on a regular basis. But now it has started again, let's go test. So we've got two endpoints here, or two requests. One's going to localhost API 5001. I'm just going to change that to use the variable instead of URL, and API users. So this is the one that we allowed anonymous access to. So this one should just work. And we should get our list of users back, such as they are. The next request to get user one, and again I'll just change this to use the URL instead of the hard-coded value. This is the one that we set up to use authorization for, and would expect this one to fail, and we get a 401 unauthorized. We're not authenticated, so our endpoint has rejected us with a 401 unauthorized for this particular endpoint. Again, that's consistent with how we've set this up. And the third request here, the get user with bearer token, well, this will give us the opportunity to send up our token to the API server, and we're going to send up this token as a bearer token. Now inside the headers here, there's an example header with the authorization header, and then we set the bearer token that we're going to pass up. Now this token will not be valid because it's from a previous request from quite some time ago. If I send this one, then once again we get 401 unauthorized. But if I send this up with a valid token, and let's just go and get the valid token for the username of Dave, and we can send this again if you just want to make sure you're getting the latest, greatest token. Then I'm just going to copy this into my clipboard without the quotes, the entire token, and I'm going to say get user with bearer token. And notice the way that this is formatted. We've got bearer as the word, and then there's a space in between bearer and the token. That space is important. If you miss the space, the token will not be validated. So we've got the bearer and the token, and if I click send, what we should find is that we get the user back. And that's exactly what we're looking for right now. That means we've authenticated to our endpoint and we've sent up the bearer token as a header. Just another point with Postman as well. Sometimes, especially when I hide the URL and not in this one, so let's just do the same again here, just to be consistent, and say URL : : when I send this request, it's not immediately apparent what URL we've sent it to, but we've also got a console inside Postman. You might find this quite useful to use sometimes. If I just clear this using the clear button and then send the request again, then we can see the request we're making. It's in yellow because we're using a self-signed certificate, and even though we're using make certs, or that would be for our Angular client anyway, but .NET uses a self-signed certificate as well, and Postman is not able to verify self-signed certificates and would expect it not to as well. So don't worry about this being in yellow. What we're really interested in is the request headers. How is this token being sent up? Well, we can see we've got the authorization header and bearer followed by that space. That space is essential. If we're missing that space, guaranteed not to work. And that's how we're sending up the whole token to our API server. And then we've got details of the response headers and the response body, also with the full URL of the request we're going to. So you might find it useful if you've got problems to also check the Postman console as well. And just to demonstrate and emphasize the point that that space is important, if I take it away and then send the request, we get 401 unauthorized again. And if I put the space back in between the bearer and the token, then I send a request, then it works. So that space is essential. But now we've confirmed that we've got our login and register and authentication set up, albeit very simply, then we're good to continue. But before we do, there's just a bit of housekeeping I want to do with our application before we do move on back to our Angular application.